The story begins with our protagonist, Kenichi Yamada. Disappointed that the servers for a game had been shut down, he longed for a game that would present a real, long-term challenge, and while searching online, he stumbled upon a game that promised to be endless. Furthermore, among its difficulties was the Infernal mode, which promised to be ridiculously hard. Our protagonist was pleased and decided to accept the challenge. There too, he had to choose a class from among those that included Swordsman, Spear User, and he could even choose the Demon Lord class. But the most difficult to master was the Summoner class. Although that class was still under development, he decided to accept the challenge, but in an instant he was transported. When he came to, he didn't know where he was and couldn't move, but suddenly he felt himself being expelled, and that's how he ended up reincarnating in another world as the son of Theresia and Roden, two humble servants. When his father realized he was a baron, he named him Alan. A year later, Alan grew up thanks to his parents who raised him with love, and unlike his former life, where he was a 35-year-old adult without education, money, or love, he liked this new life. Although he still couldn't speak, he understood his parents because the language of that world was similar to Japanese. There, Alan tells us that he was born into a family of serfs, the lowest social class in that world. That night, Alan tells us about his parents. His father, Roden, was around 20 years old and the kind man who worked hard every day. His mother, Theresia, was a pretty and kind girl who seemed to be in her late teens. Alan was an only child, but since his parents were very loving, he had no doubt that he would have siblings soon. Seeing them made Alan sleepy, and when they put him to bed and left him alone, he wanted to see his stats, but he couldn't. He had tried the same thing many times before, but hadn't gotten any results yet. However, when he tried again, it worked. Alan's scream alerted his parents, and when they went to check on him, he made the book disappear and pretended to be asleep. His parents thought he'd had a bad dream, so they let him sleep. When they left, Alan checked his stats again. They were very low, and he still had the Summoner class, just as he'd selected. Checking his skill, he realized that his level would increase the more he used it, but for now, he was limited to summoning insects and weak beasts. The book also showed him other pages about a god of creation, who basically apologized for sending him his grimoire late. He didn't care about that and wanted to use his ability as soon as possible. But when he tried to summon, nothing happened. He tried again and again, but nothing occurred. That was a nuisance because there was no guide or anything to teach him how to use his ability, so he had to figure it all out on his own. But when he remembered his ability to create, he ended up using it to create an insect card. And with the card, he could summon, but before he could, his mother came to check on him. He pretended to be asleep, and once she left, he wanted to use his ability, but since he was already sleepy, he left it for the next day. The next day, his father worked hard in the fields, while his mother took care of the housework and looked after him. But once she had supposedly left him asleep, he took the opportunity to use his ability. Then, upon summoning the insect, his grimoire began to glow, illuminating the entire room, until finally the insect leaped out toward his face. The insect was quite large, and Alan wondered if it would obey his commands. But when he ordered it to come closer, it ignored him. Upon examining the grimoire, he had to name the insect, so he named it Denka. But when he looked at the stats, he realized that summoning it increased his resistance and agility. Alan was pleased to see that, but his mother came to see him, and when she saw the insect, she got scared and ended up stepping on poor Denka. Days later, while his father hunted and his mother plowed the fields, Alan spent his time testing his abilities. He summoned a small mouse. His ability was to run, while the insect's was to jump. His summons were very weak, so he wasn't ready to face strong monsters. Alan discovered several things, such as that he could currently store 10 cards, and that all the creatures increased one of his stats, making him stronger. The problem was that leveling up was 100 times harder due to Inferno mode. When his father arrived home, he was covered in blood. This was because when winter came, the men of the village had to hunt for food. His father took him to see the creature they had married, but upon seeing the sky, Roden pointed out the Albaherons, which were flying monsters. Furthermore, Roden had named him Alan after the Albaherons because they were free, and for them, the sky was the limit. But despite all the meaning, Theresia scolded him for naming his son after a monster. Upon arriving at the location, Alan realized how enormous the monsters were, and that it would take him a long time to face them. Just then, Roden's friend Gerda arrived. He called the others to inform them that Roden had arrived. Everyone admired Roden, as he was the best hunter in the village, and thanks to him, they were able to hunt the boar. Roden introduced her to Alan, and since Alan could already speak and was polite, she was surprised that her daughter, although the same age, was not so civilized. Alan asked her about the monster, and Gerda told him that it was a C-rank monster, and it took at least 20 20 people to hunt one. That would give Alan some context. Later, Alan improved his skill until he was able to summon G-rank creatures, and he also acquired the ability to fuse summons. This opened up many possibilities for him, but for the moment, his magic points weren't enough. So, after eating, he hurried to recover his magic so he could then test his skill. But even with his magic points at maximum, he couldn't fuse creatures, nor could he create G-rank cards. Years later, after much effort, his stats had improved and he was now able to create and fuse G-rank cards. Thanks to this, he was able to summon a flying creature with the ability to mimic voices. His creatures weren't strong, but they had useful abilities like taunting enemies and digging large holes. So the key was knowing each creature's power-ups. In the afternoon, Alan played with Gerda's daughter Krenna, though he felt a bit embarrassed acting like a child, but he took the fighting seriously, as Krenna was incredibly strong. Even when he boosted his abilities, he struggled to keep up with her. As a result, Alan got beaten every day. Later, Krenna said goodbye to Alan's parents. It was then that we realized Theresia was already pregnant, which is why Alan was trying to help her in any way he could. So that evening at dinner, Alan asked his parents if he could help harvest the potatoes since his mother was pregnant. His parents thanked him, but asked him to enjoy his childhood playing with Krenna because he already helped them a lot at home. Alan insisted, but his father told him that he would eventually end up working, so he asked him to enjoy life. Alan understood that adult life was quite hard because they were trapped working very hard for almost nothing due to being of the serf class. Alan accepted this, and his parents were pleased. Furthermore, his mother asked him why he kept throwing stones at a tree, and he told them that he did it because there were monsters in the area and he wanted to be able to protect his mother. His father was proud of him, although his real goal was to acquire a new skill. His mother also asked him if he would protect Krenna, but even if he wanted to, she was stronger than him. Then his father mentioned that his evaluation ceremony would be soon. When children turned 5, a ceremony was held to assess their talents. And with a good talent, he could even free himself from servitude. Although obtaining a talent wasn't guaranteed, although he already knew what his talent was. Later, even in winter, Alan spent his time improving his skill, but even with the boost to his stats, he was still unable to beat Krenna. Watching him lose had become a habit, but when Theresia came out, she was terrified to see Alan's insect, and because of the fall, she couldn't hold on any longer. So Krenna went to get her mother for help. Rodin had no idea what to do, but luckily Matilda arrived. She ended up getting the boys out, and after a long night, Theresia gave birth. She asked Rodin to name her son. Having already chosen a name, he ended up naming him Mash. She liked the name, but hoped it wasn't related to any monster. He couldn't deny it, and although Theresia didn't like it, she eventually let it go. After the birth of his brother Alan, he began to reminisce about his past life, and although his life had been easier back then, he was very grateful for the family he had. Therefore, his goal was to free his entire family from servitude. Days later, Rodin, Alan, Gerda, and Krenna went to the nearby village to perform the evaluation ceremony. The village was inhabited by commoners, a higher rank on the social scale, but the difference with the crows was obvious at first glance, as they had better clothes. When the church doors opened, the ceremony began, where the god of creation bestowed blessings regardless of status. And as proof, there were heroes who had once been commoners, even ravens. Then Alan understood why the hero and swordsman classes began from the lowest social classes. That's why those classes faced greater difficulties in advancing. Upon entering the church, there were statues of gods, the most prominent being that of Elmia, the god of creation. He, incidentally, was connected to the developers, and the letter they sent to Alan. To begin the ceremony, the first to step forward would be Pelams, the village chief's son. Status didn't matter in the test, so anyone could receive a talent, or not. When the boy took the test, his statistics appeared on a table, revealing that he had the talent of a merchant. His father was proud because that was a good talent. The book appeared before Alan, showing him that attributes were usually measured with letters, not numbers. Luckily for Alan, only he could see his grimoire. As the ceremony continued, most didn't receive a talent, but a few did. Among them was a boy named Dogora, who received the axe user skill. He also had an A-rank attribute, which made him stand out considerably. After a while, it was finally the boy's turn. Krenna, it would be the first time, and as she placed her hand on it, the ball began to glow intensely, revealing that Krenna had very high stats and the Swordmaster talent, one of the best talents that existed. Everyone was amazed, and Gerda was very proud of her daughter. daughter. Although Alan already suspected Krena would have great talent. After all, she always beat him. When it was Alan's turn, as he placed his hand on the ball, it began to shine brighter than ever. His talent must have been truly impressive, but upon verification they were told he had no talent at all. Alan couldn't believe it, but when he saw that his talent was listed as an error in the statistics, Alan was angry with the developers because they couldn't properly debug the game, and that's why no one would know he was a summoner. His father tried to cheer him up, telling him it was okay and that they should go home. Upon returning home, his parents explained that even if he didn't receive any talent, he would always be their pride. Alan thought that being poor meant they weren't lucky, but he was still incredibly happy to have been born into that family. Later, after putting away his cards, he deduced that he was the only one playing on hell difficulty. Moreover, all the other children who had received a talent had better stats than him. But even so, he didn't plan to give up because he enjoyed the challenge. Although the fact that his talent appeared as a bug bothered him, and he planned to complain to the developers. The next day, Alan asked his mother what was wrong with his father, but he didn't want to say what had happened the night before. Krena's new title. Gerda was happily telling Krena about her talent, though Alan already knew. They would celebrate with the liqueur their boss had given them. Father was angry, so before opening it, he congratulated them with a hint of displeasure. Gerda wanted him to drink too. Alan thought his father was jealous about the Krena title, but he knew his father wasn't petty. That's why he didn't know the reason for his anger. Gerda insisted they enjoy the party. Rodin was pleased by Krena's talent, but Gerda didn't understand why he had suggested cutting ties with his family. Rodin didn't want to do it, but since Krena's talent was so astonishing, they might even become nobles. That's why he thought they shouldn't waste their time socializing with servants like themselves. Alan realized that Rodin was trying to do them an unsolicited favor, but Gerda became angry because status didn't matter to her. They had a heated argument, and Alan grew tired of listening to them. That's why he wanted to stop them, along with Krena. But Matilda and Theresia managed to calm them down, and things calmed down. Alan asked his aunt if they always fought. It turned out that before they were parents, they used to throw punches over the smallest things. His mother also told him that the four of them had been childhood friends, and 10 years ago, when they learned that a new town was going to be established, they decided to join it together. And since they built their houses together, the two houses looked quite similar. They were proud of the work they had done. So, once the anger subsided, they started drinking. The next day they went to see Gerda to inform her that the Order of Knights had arrived to see Krena. They went to the village to meet them. There, Dagora spoke with Alan and reprimanded him for being there without any talent. Krena defended him because Alan was very strong. When the Order of Knights arrived, Krena was pleased. The captain of the order wanted to speak with Krena and her father. Alan assumed he wanted to recruit Krena to become a knight, but in reality, he wanted to test Krena's combat skills in a duel. Gerda refused because Krena was just a child and had never touched a real sword. But the chief insisted they have the duel because otherwise he would assume Krena's title had been a sham. And if that were the case, falsifying the ceremony's results was punishable by death. Gerda begged him to cancel the duel because her daughter might die, but he made it clear that if she didn't participate, she and her family would be executed. That wasn't fair. Not to mention the duel would be with the vice captain. They'd have to fight with real swords. Krena was excited by the idea, but her father was beside himself with nerves. The fight would take place, and although the sword was larger than Krena, she could fight without any problem. The vice captain obviously had better technique, and when he got serious, he forced her back, but far from surrendering, she went all out. Sensing the danger, the vice captain sent her flying. Gerda was furious, but the knight subdued him and the others. Alan knew it was unfair, because even though Krena was a master swordswoman, she was still at a disadvantage against the adults. But suddenly, she let her skill take over and began to subdue the vice captain until she finally destroyed his sword. The captain stopped the duel, and Krena returned to normal. She didn't know what had happened, but she thanked the vice captain for the fight. With her daughter Gerda's victory, she began to celebrate, but she was worried that she might be hurt, even though she was fine. The captain arrived to congratulate them, but Gerda wasn't happy with him. The captain apologized and asked her to speak elsewhere to discuss their daughter's future. They ended up going to the village chief's house. Although Gerda was there reluctantly, the talented boys were there too. But what Alan noticed most was the fruit to take home. When they spoke, the captain introduced himself as Xenoph and informed them that he had been sent there to determine if Krena's talent was genuine. And since he had already confirmed it, and the village still lacked a name, he ended up naming it Krena Village at the request of the Baron of the lands. The chief thought it was fine, so there was no problem. He also told them that 3 years ago, a sword lord had been born into a count's family. Alan found this odd, because sword lords could only be born into the social classes of serf, commoner, or baron, and Xenoph confirmed it because this supposed swordsman, failing to measure up, underwent a re-evaluation and was found to be merely an ordinary swordsman. After that, it was discovered that numerous members of the nobility had exaggerated their talents. For that reason, the kingdom had decided to thoroughly verify the results of the talent tests. He apologized again to Gerda for putting her daughter to such a difficult test, and Gerda, understanding the situation, accepted his apology. Xenoph also asked him to continue supporting Krena, because when she turned 12, she could attend the academy and eventually serve the royal family directly. Alan was happy for her, but Dogora wanted to know if anyone who went to the academy could become a knight. His father apologized for his son's informality, but explained that he was like that because, being talented with an axe, he wanted to join the knights, and while they were talking, Alan was out gathering fruit to take home. Xenoph informed them that an instructor would be sent to the village at some point, so he recommended that Alan work hard to be accepted into the academy. Krena wanted Alan to study with them as well. Although Dogora believed he didn't have what it took to study, Krena assured him that he was capable. The captain was intrigued by Alan's dark hair and eyes, so his father introduced them. Gerda also introduced Rodin, but upon hearing his name, Xenoph recognized it, and he wanted to congratulate him because he was a local legend, because thanks to him they got a lot of wild boar meat, which the Baron of the lands loved. Rodin thanked him for the compliment. Later, when saying goodbye to the boys, Rodin spoke with Alan, explaining that even though they didn't have any particular talent, even servants like him could be recognized by the greats if they worked hard. That's why he encouraged Alan to keep going. Alan remembered secretly taking fruit to give to his mother and mash, and wondered if that was wrong, but his father had done the same thing. Years later, after much effort, Alan's summoning ability leveled up, so now he had the ability to enhance, and he had unlocked F-rank summons, so he was getting closer and closer to summoning very powerful beasts. His inventory had also increased from 20 to 30 cards, which meant a larger increase. That evening, we learned that his mother was pregnant again, which is why Alan was taking care of many of her chores. They were still deciding on a name for the baby, but while they were talking about it, Alan received a message from Elmea, but his parents asked him not to use the Lord's name in vain. He knew the message was from the developers, so changing the subject, he asked his father about the wound on his arm. His father told him he got it during the god trial while hunting the boar. Alan didn't know about the test, so his father explained that at special times there was a test of the gods that granted them energy and eliminated all their injuries and exhaustion. Alan knew that this feeling was because he was leveling up, becoming increasingly. He was stronger, and although he trained daily, he couldn't level up because he needed experience defeating monsters. That's why he hinted to his father that he wanted to join a hunt. But his father immediately refused because it was dangerous and could cost him his life. Later, Alan read the developer's message informing him that they had fixed the bugs, and all thanks to his complaint. His stats were still showing as rank E, but they sent him a file showing the stats he could have. He was excited and, while testing the ability to empower his creatures, he used an insect to try it out. Empowering his creatures didn't increase their stats, but it did make them slightly more powerful. However, while he was experimenting, his mother entered the room and, startled, stepped on the insect. The next day, his father would go hunting, while Alan had to do the household chores. In his free time, he experimented with his ability, but he was still unable to mix several creatures. But luckily, some cards worked, giving him an apple card. The creature was technically a weed, but the surprising thing was that it increased his magic point stat. That was super useful, because with that card, I could still experiment more during the day. When he summoned the card, he ended up naming it Apple. Apple wasn't a fighter, and when he showed it his ability, he saw that it was aroma. Alan asked to use it, so he ended up digging himself up to pull a stem from the ground, but even though it smelled nice, it wasn't very useful. His mother arrived with him, but when she tried to hide the letter, she couldn't. The plant there was kind of suspicious, although his mother ended up liking the smell. A while later, Alan and Krenna were training, and as usual, Krenna beat him again. Although she noticed that Alan had grown stronger, he didn't realize it until she mentioned it, and he wondered if the aroma ability had any effect in combat. Speaking of combat, he remembered that he had a creature capable of using bite, but even though he wanted to try it, he knew he couldn't test it on humans. Alan also practiced his casting every day to improve his skill, though it didn't seem to be working. But while he was practicing, his brother noticed the apple plants in the yard, and Alan had quite a few because he'd discovered that the scent ability could shorten the magic point regeneration time from 6 hours to 5. But even so, she felt that she didn't have enough time, although partly it was because she spent her time taking care of her brother and doing housework. That night, his mother was worried because Rodan hadn't returned home yet. But when they heard several voices, they went outside to see what was happening. It turned out that Rodan had been seriously injured. Upon entering, Gerda told them that a boar had pierced his stomach with a tusk, which immediately cauterized the wound. Gerda was able to save her life thanks to a healing herb called Mulerze flower. This flower was very expensive, and Theresia asked how she obtained it. Gerda explained that the knights had given her some gold coins as an apology for what happened with Krenna, and thanks to that, she was able to get the flower. The other servants were angry with the commoners and wanted to go and complain. Marsh woke up to the noise and, seeing his father, began to cry. Alan calmed him down, and when the servants left, Gerda stayed behind to look after Rodan. Asked her what had happened. Gerda then told him that because wild boar meat was valuable, the village chief had commoners help them, in a manner of speaking, with the hunt. In these hunts with commoners, the commoners got the lion's share, and the serfs got the scraps, although most of the meat ended up going to the Baron of the lands. But despite that, no commoner volunteered for the hunts because of the danger involved. That's why the serfs risked their lives to put food on the table, since they had no other choice. Alan asked why the commoners had joined this time. Then Gerda told him that, having heard of Rodan as a hunting legend, the commoners assumed they would be safe as long as Rodan was around. And to make matters worse, during training, the commoners took hunting lightly because they felt superior to the serfs. But when the day of the hunt arrived, upon seeing a giant boar, they fled, abandoning their positions and completely ruining the strategy. And when a commoner was about to be attacked, Rodan ended up protecting him, suffering serious injuries in the process. Even so, they managed to kill the boar, so Gerda would bring them Rodan's share, and before leaving, she asked them to take good care of Rodan. They spent the whole night looking after Rodan, and when he woke up, they were all happy to see him recovering. But when Alan saw them, he realized that he spent all his time trying to increase his power, but without any purpose. Meanwhile, his parents worked hard to survive, because for them, life wasn't a game. That's why he decided his purpose would be to protect his family. Gerda finally arrived and was happy to see Rodan. He brought her share of the meat, and since Rodan needed to recover, he told her not to worry because they would make sure her family was well taken care of during the winter. For this, Rodan was very grateful. Alan wanted to take care of his family, so he promised to keep them safe. From then on, Alan worked hard every day, bringing water home every day. People were impressed by his strength. Although Alan was strong, because he had invested all his physical stat enhancements, which was contradictory for a mage, but he would do anything for his family. Gerda taught him how to harvest potatoes, but when he did it himself, Gerda was impressed by his strength and how hard he worked. However, his effort wasn't well rewarded because half the potatoes had to be given to the Baron. And just as Alan was thinking about getting more food to get through the winter, the village chief arrived to check on Rodan. He brought fruit as a gesture of condolence, but he also brought the commoner Rodan had protected. The commoner apologized for ruining everything. Alan didn't take kindly to this, but his father only asked him to be more careful next time if he wanted to continue hunting. He assured him he would take it seriously, and Alan was amazed by his father, but Theresia gave him a well-deserved scolding because his mistake had almost cost her husband his life. He accepted the blame, and when Rodan's friends arrived, they were glad to hear he was better, although they knew he still couldn't go hunting because he was recovering. The next day, Alan set out to hunt a creature. To do so, he cleared an area and used frogs with the ability to provoke and attract attract animals. This didn't seem to work, but suddenly a bird was drawn to the frogs. The problem was that it was a giant monster. Alan knew he couldn't defeat a rank D monster, so he thought about escaping, but seeing that his skills had improved to level 2, he had more chance to defeat the monster. And in order to help his family, he took the risk of throwing a rock at the monster and then attacking it with his wooden sword. That wasn't enough, so he summoned wolves to attack the bird. They were no match for the bird, and when Alan tried to go after it, it ended up knocking him down. And with all the creatures the bird eliminated, his improvements had diminished. Alan was in trouble and could barely defend himself against the monster. Alan managed to defend himself and used worms to weaken the monster. Alan was able to break free and summoned wolves and worms to attack the monster, delivering the final blow. Alan had done it. He single-handedly defeated a rank D monster and gained 100 experience points. After that, he took the monster's body to his parents, saying he had managed to catch it off guard. Rodin was worried about his eye injury, even though he claimed to be fine. Gerda was surprised that he hunted that monster with only a wooden sword and some stones. But when she examined the body, she saw that the bird had bite marks. So Alan had to say that his instinct took over and he fought as best he could. Gerda would butcher it for Rodin. Although upon seeing it, Alan noticed the blow he had received, and he knew that Krina must have done it. Gerda would also teach Alan how to butcher a bird and extract the valuable parts. But to their surprise and dismay, they had to give 60% of the creature to the Baron, which was outrageous. Gerda extracted a magic stone from the monster, although even that stone was subject to taxation. And since the serfs were practically taxed for everything, even breathing, Alan came up with an idea to avoid paying so much tax in their situation. So when they went to the village chief, they proposed giving him all the feathers as tax. The chief didn't like that, because the Baron had asked for more meat that year. Then Gerda added the magic stone to the deal as well. That still wasn't enough. Then Gerda used guilt against him, mentioning that because of him, Rodin had been seriously injured and now his family would starve if they didn't get enough food for the winter. Alan played along, pretending to be very hungry, so Gerda again pointed fingers. The village chief eventually accepted the deal out of guilt, so the plan worked. Taking advantage of the situation, Alan asked to repeat the deal if he managed to hunt more monsters. Gerda mentioned how difficult it would be to hunt another monster as just a child. The chief considered this and agreed that he could keep the meat if he managed to kill another monster. Alan wasted no time and started farming monsters, but this time 2 monsters arrived at once. Alan dispelled the summons and attacked with draining worms to weaken them, then stunned them with stones before sending his wolves to attack. This left the monsters very weak, so Alan finished them off. Alan had been hunting monsters for several days, so he had already gained considerable experience and had finally managed to level up for the first time. With the boost, his points returned to the maximum and his stats increased significantly. So, with his first boost, he decided to tell his parents about his newfound skill. When he got home, his father was surprised that he had managed to hunt 2 monsters, but since it was getting late, he had to leave. Alan went to train with Krena, but what he was thinking about was that with the 10 monsters he had hunted, they would have enough food for the winter. The only thing left to do was trade the meat for other things. But because he was distracted, Krena beat him again, and he also ended up with a bump on his head. That night, Alan spoke with his parents and told them he had heard an oracle from God saying that he would be blessed with power and wisdom. They didn't understand what he was talking about. Then he explained that he was basically stronger and smarter than the average person, and that he would have to face several very difficult trials. His mother was worried, but his father knew he had already completed one because his wound had disappeared. Alan also explained several things to them, such as why his attributes on the test were low because his talent was new. That's why his true values weren't displayed. His parents were amazed that he had a talent, but Alan told them that the oracle hadn't revealed what it was. Although, in truth, he didn't want to reveal that he was a summoner, because it could be dangerous for people to find out he could summon creatures. His mother hugged him and learned that he had been training very hard and had gone monster hunting for the test he had been given. So Alan apologized for not telling them sooner. They too would keep his talent a secret. But Rodin asked if he could tell Gerda. Alan agreed. He was happy because Gerda always spoke of Krena as a master of the sword. So now he too could say that his son was just as amazing. Later, with the arrival of winter, Alan prepared everything to go out and sell his wares. Gerda accompanied him to the village to trade. There, Alan asked her what the difference was between a commoner and a serf. Then he told her about status and taxes. Serfs had to pay a 60% tax. Commoners, on the other hand, were exempt from that tax and only had to pay 3 gold coins per person per year. and one for each child. That seemed convenient, so Alan asked if there was a way for a serf to become a commoner. There was in fact a way, to give 10 gold coins per person in the family. He had also heard that the Baron could reward serfs by making them commoners. Alan told his brother that he would be born soon, so the amount he needed was 50 gold coins to achieve this. Upon arriving at a shop, Gerda traded meat for salt, and seeing how it worked, Alan also traded meat for salt. They went around town exchanging meat for things like fruit and firewood. Alan was still learning about prices, so the next day he returned to the village to exchange meat for goods. There, he also asked how much the products would cost if bought with money. However, when he checked the prices, a single piece of fruit cost the same as the meat he had brought. Obviously, I wasn't buying that fruit. Gathering information, he discovered that a package of dried meat was equivalent to a bag of salt, 4 red fruits, 1 orange fruit, or firewood for 4 days. And in terms of money, a package of meat was worth 1 silver coin. So doing the math, he would have to hunt 500 bird monsters to collect the 50 gold coins. That would take him years, but it didn't discourage him. A while later, he went to a medicine shop and, seeing the medicinal herbs, was able to record them in his grimoire. There, Alan asked about the Millerzi flower, but the shopkeeper told him he didn't have any, and even if he did, he wouldn't sell it to him. Alan didn't understand, so the shopkeeper explained that Gerda had bought the last one a month ago. She went into his shop and insisted quite a bit that he sell it to her, and since it cost 5 gold coins, she begged him to accept 3 and then pay the rest. Because a friend needed help, and because of his insistence, he had to accept. And although he paid him everything in the end, it was still a bad deal because he came out on the losing end. Upon hearing this, Alan gave him a package of meat, because thanks to the flour he sold to Gerda, he had saved his father's life. That's why he thanked him. Later, while passing by an armory, he noticed how expensive everything was. Dogora asked him what he wanted from his family store. Alan didn't want any trouble and said goodbye, but the boy pushed him aside and told him he could only enter if he agreed to be his subordinate. Alan didn't like that attitude, so he challenged him to a duel. The boy accepted and went to get his weapon, and when he returned, he went all out. But Alan dodged all his attacks. The boy was strong, but he was no match for Krena, so with one blow, he ended up defeating them both, and he said goodbye, telling him that he would return someday to trade at his shop. Sometime later, Rodan recovered, and Mula, Alan's sister, was born. With the arrival of spring, Dogora would often go with Alan to train, though she never managed to beat him. Krena also trained Mash, though she was kinder to him. Dogora wanted to catch him off guard, but even then she couldn't touch him. That night, when Alan was talking to his mother, Rodan arrived with Gerda, but they brought bad news. The chief wanted to increase the number of boars they had to deliver from 10 to 15, and for that, the commoners also had to join the hunt. They wanted to refuse, but the order came directly from the Baron, and if they didn't gather the 15 boars, he would recruit serfs from other areas. This would create a conflict over the land, and dispossess those who couldn't hunt. And the worst part was that the number would increase to 20 next year. That was almost impossible for them, but they had no choice. Alan said that assuming they managed it, they would expect more and more from them until it became impossible. And as a result, they would recruit more servants. Rodan understood that Alan was suggesting they accept the help of the commoners. Gerda disagreed, but Alan knew that in this situation, it was the best option, and he had an idea to make it work. A short time later, with Rodan recovered, he would join the hunts. Alan would also accompany them, as he was the strategist, though he would only be an observer. He really wanted to participate in the hunt, but no matter how much he insisted, he couldn't convince his father. But the important thing now was to train the newcomers to help them hunt wild boars, because he didn't want to see anyone get hurt again. With everything ready, the servants would leave the village to hunt wild boars. It was Alan's first time leaving the village, and upon seeing a large mountain, he knew it was the White Dragon Mountain, because according to legend, the mythical dragon lived near the mountain summit. But because he was so distracted, the others thought Alan was backing down. That wasn't the case though. A short while later, they arrived at the place where they would begin the hunt. Everyone had a fixed position. So, at the start, some lured a wild boar so that another group could defend it. They had to hold their ground so that the other group could attack from the sides. That was the strategy that worked best for the serfs. But this time, Alan included the commoners, so they would attack last. The previous mistake had been putting them in front of the tanks when they were too weak for that. They were still mostly a hindrance, but Alan's plan was for them to attack the monster as well, so that when they defeated it, they too would gain experience and grow stronger. They felt the increase in strength, so the plan worked. The only problem was that Alan wasn't gaining experience because he wasn't participating in the fight. The commoners thanked Alan for including them in the hunt, although Alan was somewhat frustrated that even they were gaining experience while he wasn't. The next day, when Alan went to fetch water, some servants asked him if he would be going on that day's hunt. He said he would go, but asked them to convince his father to let him participate. They wouldn't dream of letting him go though, because Rodan would kick their asses just for suggesting it. The other servant envied him because he also wanted to join the hunt, but since his wife was pregnant, he couldn't put himself in danger. That's why he dedicated himself to butchering the monsters they hunted. Alan had an idea, and after talking to the guy, he took him to his house to butcher the monsters he hunted. In return, he would give him 2 packages of meat for each one. The servant thought it was a good deal, and so did Alan, because he needed someone to prepare the monsters for sale, and since it would be more expensive if a butcher in the city did it, subcontracting someone from the village was a better option, because if he wanted to gather the 50 gold coins to free his family from servitude, he had to make the most of his time. Days later, when they went hunting, they gradually added more commoners to the group. The idea was that if the team grew larger, they could form 2 hunting parties, which would increase the number of boars they could hunt. Although Alan still wondered why the Baron was obsessed with having more meat if his territory wasn't suffering from a food shortage. When the tank group lured a boar, they stopped it so the commoners could attack it alongside the strike group. Each hunt made the commoners stronger, and Alan benefited from it as well. He discovered he could summon creatures from 50 meters away, and with that, he summoned an insect for the boar to stomp on. And when they finished off the boar, he also gained experience, though he felt bad about his summoning. Sometime later, the boys returned from the mayor's house, where he had invited them for New Year's, and given them plenty of sweets, and even liquor, to take home as a reward for meeting their quota of 15 wild boars. When they arrived home, their parents were already waiting for them to celebrate the new year. At first, everyone enjoyed the meal, and after a while, they began talking about how well their hunting was going. Therefore, they shouldn't have any problem meeting their quota of 20 wild boars that year. But suddenly, Gerda noticed the bottle behind Alan. He told them it was liquor the chief had given him. They were pleased, but Alan had anticipated this situation. That's why he asked Mash if she wanted to train with a spear. Krina wanted to too, but she was already strong enough. So the main thing was to take care of Mash, so she could learn to use the spear. They didn't understand Alan's intention, but his father got straight to the point, telling him that if the boss had sent him home with liquor, it was obviously for the adults. But Alan clarified that the boss had given it to him because they hadn't wanted to go with them. Alan was playing dumb with them, but they were all heavily into liquor, so he offered to give it to them if they beat him in a challenge. Gerda agreed without hesitation, so Alan asked what he would get if he won. They hadn't thought of that, so they asked him what he wanted, and what Alan wanted was to be allowed to use a spear during all the boar hunts. So confident they would win, they accepted the deal. The winner would be decided by an arm wrestling match between Alan and them. They agreed for obvious reasons, but at the start of the duel, Alan focused all his enhancements on his physical strength. At the start, Gerda had the advantage, but when things got serious, Alan began to pull ahead until he finally beat him. But even though he won, it was a hard-fought victory. That's why his father would wait until he recovered. And once he was ready, Alan noticed how calloused his hands were, and he knew it was proof of how hard he worked for his family. Rodan still couldn't believe his son was already capable of competing against him, but Alan wanted him to start treating him like an adult as soon as possible. That's why he wanted to beat him. At the start, Alan went all out, but his father didn't hold back and in a matter of seconds beat him. Alan didn't like losing, but now he knew what it took to catch up with his father. They won the bet, so they started drinking. There, Alan tells us that Gerda had a strength of approximately rank D, while her father's was rank C, which would serve as a good reference point. They enjoyed the drink, and his father explained that he wouldn't let him join the hunts until he could defeat him. He was determined to defeat him, and if he raised his summoning level to 4, he would have a better chance, so he accepted his proposal. A while later, Gerda got drunk, and since she wanted to boss Matilda around, Matilda ended up overpowering her. Because of this, Alan began to think that Matilda also had C-rank stats. Months later, Alan leveled up his summoning skill, allowing him to summon E-rank creatures. His card inventory also increased by 10 slots. Filling his inventory with 40 E-rank cards would boost his stats even further. He believed he could finally defeat his father. But upon seeing the book, he noticed it had a new ability, storage. Alan tested the storage, and he discovered that it had no limit and he could fit anything that fit in the hole. Having unlimited storage was a great thing to get at that point. That's why he kept thinking about it. Because the ability they gave him was god level, but those kinds of abilities or items were only obtained when you were very far into the game, and they were necessary to progress. That's why he thought the developers had made a mistake. He thought about it a lot, but when he went to try creating E-rank cards, he realized he couldn't do it. Magic points weren't the problem. It was that now creating E-rank cards required magic stones. Then he stealthily entered his house and went to get the bag of money he had to take out the magic stones he had obtained from some horned rabbits. With the magic stones, he tried again to create cards, but the grimoire wouldn't detect the stone even though he held it in his hand, so he put it in his inventory. And thanks to that, he was able to create an E-rank card. He took the butterfly out, but he hadn't imagined it would be so big. And when he heard his mother, he tried to hide it, but he didn't have time, and when she arrived, Alan was acting strangely. Fortunately, his mother didn't notice. Later, Alan stood before a saber-toothed tiger, although it was actually one of his summons, and because it was so intimidating, he'd even forgotten that. The tiger increased his stats by 10 points, double the value of his previous cards. He ended up naming the tiger Tama, and when he returned to the grimoire, he tried to fuse it, but he couldn't. So he realized that even to fuse creatures, he needed magic stones. By fusing them, he was able to create a falcon. He could fuse several creatures. The problem was that he would need many magic stones. That night, Alan asked around about horned rabbits to get stones, but unfortunately, there were anti-rabbits near the village because years ago they had dug a ditch to scare them away, as they were dangerous for children. Alan was at a loss for how to get more stones. But the next day, when Krenna was beating Dogora up, Alan spoke to Pelhams because he knew he was clever and must know information about the magic stones. Pel told him several things about the stones, such as that they were obtained from monsters and were commonly used to activate magical tools. D and C rank stones were the most common in the capital, but E-rank stones were technically considered junk and could be found lying on the ground. The E-rank stones were the ones Alan used for summons. He was able to obtain D-rank stones from the birds, but those were taxed and he couldn't keep them. That's why Pelham's information would be incredibly useful to him. Then, searching the entire village with the help of some villagers, he was able to gather several stones, and thanks to that, he was able to create all the available E-rank cards. But when he was about to test them, his hawk flew out, warning him of the danger. A boar burst from the bushes and attacked him. Fortunately, he now had a healing spell. When the monster attacked again, the butterfly emerged to put it to sleep. Then Tama emerged to attack and defeat the monster. But another boar appeared out of nowhere to attack him. Fortunately, he also had a defensive summon. That was enough to defeat the boar, although afterwards Alan seemed to wake up from a dream and thought that what he saw had been a hallucination. He dismissed it and began to think about how to use his summons correctly, because each creature had a specific role. Insects were for weakening, beasts for attacking, birds for gathering information, plants for healing, and stone-type creatures for defending. Therefore, he alone could fulfill all the roles of an entire team with his summons. Furthermore, he discovered that the infinite storage he had gained at that point was not a mistake, but rather that it would allow him to carry hundreds of magic stones with him. With these, he would have an unparalleled army of creatures. And well, that's it for this video. If you liked it, please leave a like and a comment. You can also subscribe so you don't miss the next part, since the anime is still airing, so I'll upload the next part as soon as possible. And with nothing more to say, I'll say goodbye. I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you in the next video.